The last section that we have on the homepage is the footer, which we need to turn into a component so that we can reuse it on every page of the website. Now, looking at this footer, I actually see some similarities to what we have here. The header looks very similar in the fact that we have kind of like a big heading. We've got this green background with dots, and the elements are aligned, spaced between within a flexbox. It's just different element, but it's the same class. And then the links also in the grid here look very similar to what we have here. So I'm going to try and reuse some of the elements that we've built before to try to reuse them and build this faster. But in general, if I'm looking at the structure here, I can already see 3 groups. So header, let's call this links area, and then I guess we'll call it rights or all rights reserved or something like this as a third. So we have 3 divs, I would say, within this footer. So that's the structure I'm going to go with. All right, let's go here into the page wrapper. Let me add a new section just so that we can have things clean and nice. We're going to call this footer section. And inside of it, I already know I need 3 divs. So let me go ahead and do div number 1. Maybe I can literally copy the menu header. Let's go ahead and try that. Let's see that. So what is the structure here? Here we have a menu header, which is a flexbox organizing these events, these elements. It has the background and the dots. Let me just try to copy this element as is, and let's see what happens. So I'm going to go into my footer and paste this header. I do think that this is too big, and this is actually smaller, I would say. This one says 200, while this is 220. So it's a little bit smaller, this one. So menu heading, let me actually go ahead and duplicate this style, and I'm going to call this, the duplicate, I'm going to call footer heading. Footer heading. It's becoming a little bit slow to work on this page just because we have so many elements loaded up here. I might just want to go into this events grid and limit the items here to just 10, just so that it doesn't take up so much memory, and we'll bring this back at the end. Let's go back into the footer that we have here. In general, the whole footer needs to have a green background. So let's set the footer to green background. Okay. And what do we have with this? We have this padding, maybe this padding. Why do we've got this spacing? Let's see. The calendar section doesn't have padding. Maybe this menu header is creating some padding. I am not sure yet what the spacing is coming from, because it looks as if this section ends here and the footer section ends here, but maybe as we add more content, this will organize itself. So this is now a footer heading. Let's make this a little bit smaller. Okay. And we don't need this close button here, so I can just delete this close button and just bring in this icon instead, this huge arrow that we have here. So let's go ahead and copy that into the menu header. Let's preserve the size currently, although it's too big. Change the text color to white, so the arrow is white. And let's rename this class footer arrow and just give it a smaller size. Let's try to use viewport width just so that it's 10, just so that it'll be responsive. Okay, this looks pretty good. What else do we have here? Okay, the header actually looks good. Let's add the next section afterwards. Let's call this footer links. So let's add a div and let's call this footer links. And inside of it, I need to have basically 2 elements that are organized side by side, this text area and this links area, links grid. So in the footer, let me add another div, which we'll call, maybe this is footer description. How are we going to call this? Let's call this footer content. And then another div that is going to be the footer grid, footer links grid. Okay, and these 2 needs to be side by side, so we're going to change that into a flexbox, horizontal flexbox. Inside the footer content, let's bring in a text element, text block, and let's bring in this text. That's great. Probably want to style this by selecting the footer content, giving it a little bit of padding, turning it into black, and making it it's uppercase and semi-bold and something like that. Uppercase, semi-bold. Okay, this looks good. We'll make sure that we'll see if the grid links don't push this, we'll organize the size later. But inside of this grid link, let's turn this into a grid like this. Now we've got 2 elements in here, 2 rows, which is basically what we need. And let's see if we can take the actual links. Actually, maybe I don't want to call this footer links grid, because maybe I can just copy the grid that I've already styled here. So let's see here. We've got this menu sport link, which we'll want to reuse, and we've got the menu sport grid. So that is exactly the grid that we want. So let me actually copy this class and see if we can reuse that. Let's hide the menu. And instead of using a new class, menu link grid, let's reuse this one. So we can't see it because there's nothing inside, but let's go ahead. Now this menu support grid needs to have some links inside, and I want to use the class that we have here for the links. So this is a link block that is called menu support link. I wonder if I can copy this menu support link. Maybe I won't be able because it's a CMS item, but let's see what happens if I just copy it and try to paste it inside of the menu support grid. No, dynamic elements can only be moved within the collection. Okay, so I'm gonna have to recreate this. Menu support link, let's copy this class, and I'm just selecting this element even though I can't see it. I'm just going to do this a little bit blind. Command E, add a link block inside. This link block I'm gonna give the class that I copied, which is menu support link. Fantastic. Inside, what do we have inside? We have this button highlight, which we may want. I'm not going to worry about the interaction right now. We have a text that is called menu support name. So I'm going to copy this. Inside, I'm going to add a text block that is the class of menu support name. And then what else do we have? We have the menu support name icon. Let me see if this I can just copy and paste, and I can. Okay, let's see what is happening. Let's hide the menu, and it looks closed. Let's change this to maybe members zone so it's not so long. Okay, looks good. And now let's see if I copy this menu support link 5 more times, paste it. 1, 2, 3. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Okay, we basically have it. We can change these to what we want. Can copy and paste the text. And what really bothers me right now is why we still have this gap between the sections. So once I'm done with the links, I want to figure this out. Okay, let's figure out why we have this space here. This actually gives us a chance to talk a little bit about how we're troubleshooting when we have something weird going on in Webflow. This is what developers call debugging, finding where the bug comes from. And there's a kind of like a nice mental framework to think about how to solve troubleshoot. I think developers call it a lion in the desert, which basically means, if you have a full-on desert and there's one lion in there, what is the optimal way to find it? And basically what you need to do is you need to cut the desert in 2 and then ask the question, is the lion here? Is the lion here? Wherever you get the yes, then you move into that part of the desert, cut the desert in half again, and you always ask, is it here? Is it here? This is the optimal way to find it. The way that I'm going to use this metaphor to try to figure out the problem is I'm asking myself, I want to split the problem into 2, right? Where is this gap coming from? Is it coming from the footer, or is it coming from the top section here? Now, I don't know. So the way to figure that one out, the way to cut the desert and see where the half of the problem is coming from, let me take another section here and just temporarily, let's take the members section and temporarily bring it between these 2. Reorganize them. Okay, so now look what happens. Now there's a gap between this part and the members section, but there's no gap between the footer and the member section. This basically tells me that the problem is not with the footer section. The problem is actually with the calendar section. So we've basically cut the desert in half. Now we know where the problem is. The problem is somewhere in this grid. So let's see what we have here. Actually, I think I know. We have this grid item, and you can see that here it is. You see that we gave this 40 pixels padding, which is basically pushing. And actually, when I'm hovering on top of this, you can see that this is what's pushing here, the gap between them. If I remove this, you can see, no space. So maybe instead of margins, which is pushing an extra space outside of the box, we just give it 40 padding inside of the box. Okay, so that was the problem. The problem was that we've added extra 40 pixels at the end of this grid item, and that created this little bug here. So with that, we've basically solved it. And we've got one last section in the footer that we have, which is this last one. Let's call it rights reserved, I guess. Oh, undo what I did here. Let's copy this text here, all rights reserved. Let's add one last div to the section. Let's call it footer rights. And basically, all it needs to have is a little bit of padding and this top border that we have here. So let's give it a tiny bit of padding and then top border. So border, top, 1 pixel, and then have a tiny bit of text inside. So let's add a text block. And this text box needs to be aligned to the right. So in the footer's right, I can either right align or I can turn it into a flex box that is aligning the text to the right side, which we have here. I can also use this to style the text that we have, turn it into black, paste the text in here, all rights reserved. And with that, I think the footer is basically done. What I'm going to do is turn this footer section, turn that into a component because we'll be reusing it on every page footer, and the footer is done.